Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thanks for having this hearing, to really zone in on the needs of our rural communities. So I represent the 1st District of Kansas, which is 60 counties in the mostly central and western part of the state. I'm from a rural community. My hometown, 800 people. My driver's ed coach was also my basketball coach, which if you're from a rural community, you understand that. And he used to load us up when we drive 60 miles to the big city of Hayes, because there are stoplights in Hayes and there's no stoplight in our county, as we were learning how to drive. Our family has a farm and a feed yard, and I remember that my dad and brother still operate, but middle of the night, cattle truck rolls in, you unload them. Those cattle may have been on the road from Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, incredibly important. And repeatedly, the driver's number one priority was safety, and also caring for those animals, and then they would put their own needs last, because that's just the makeup of that industry. And Mr. Vanderwall, a handful of questions for you, and this continues to come up, this errors of service operation or exemption, and it keeps coming up this morning because it is so incredibly important to the industry. So would you just further expand upon the importance of the exemption, but also possible ramifications, or what are the effects if we do not continue this exemption in the future?
Well, thank you for that question. It all comes down to flexibility, again, like I said before. I'll use the example of loading cattle in Montana. That can vary by a couple of hours. And if it's so important, especially in hot times when you're hauling livestock, you have to keep moving to make sure that the air moves through the trailer to keep livestock cool. And they can't just be sitting along the edge of the road. So, like I said earlier, that may limit a person's ability to sell where he wants to sell, or it could just be a situation where we're not treating the livestock right, and that's not what we're after at all. It's, first is safety of the people driving the truck and the vehicles around it, but also animal welfare.
That's exactly right. What could Congress do to improve upon the exemption, and should we consider codifying it or making it permanent? We forget, we have to make an exemption every year. I would be for just making this flexibility permanent, but what are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, first of all, we very much appreciate the exemption because it has solved some problems and given us flexibility. But it would be nice to have it permanent, because we always have to have our antennas up to make sure we are out there advocating to get that renewed again.
Yeah, and it just provides more uncertainty to an industry that is plagued with uncertainty, yes, given market conditions and all the travails of trying to raise and care for, feed, and eventually produce livestock to produce meat. Last question, how can Congress ensure that our rural infrastructure is prioritized at a time when it seems like many times the administration overlooks rural America? In your view, Mr. Vanderwall, what is administration and what ought we be doing to focus more on the rural communities all across our country from a transportation standpoint?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it really comes down to recognize the importance of rural America in producing our food for our country and for the world, and also energy and fiber. I always say when I give a speech, food security is national security. And as long as we can feed ourselves, no matter what happens around the world, we'll be okay. But if we get to the point where we have to depend on other countries for our food supply, that's a serious problem.
I wholeheartedly agree. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for having this hearing. Thank you all for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields.